Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board and the Nebraska Corn Board.
Growing more with less is the mantra of Nebraska's corn farmers, and they're using incredible technology to do it. Soil moisture monitors let them know when their crop needs water and how much. GPS systems eliminate overlaps in the field, saving fuel and money. New hybrids reduce the use of pesticides and increase yields. When you're talking new technology and innovation, Nebraska corn farmers are all ears. Nebraska's family corn farmers, sustaining innovation.
Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board and the Nebraska Corn Board.
Welcome to this week's edition of Market Journal. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. We're reporting this week from Husker Harvest Days near Grand Island. On this episode, John Meuret analyzes the USDA's September crop report. Cathy Anderson explains why growers need to sign contracts for ARC and PLC farm programs. Dave Goeller talks about farm succession planning. Tyler Williams gives a forecast for harvest weather conditions, and Nathan Mueller demonstrates how corn producers can estimate individual field yields. John Meuret from Meuret Grain Company is our corn and soybean market analyst this week. The USDA is expecting a smaller corn crop than it projected in August, but a bigger output in soybeans. The agency's September crop report, released a week ago, trimmed corn yields by more than a bushel and slightly increased soybean yields. For Nebraska, the USDA is estimating corn yields at 184 bushels per acre, 3 bushels lower than last month. However, the agency believes the state's soybean crop will be the best ever, both in production and yield. The expected average yield of 56 bushels per acre would be the best on record for Nebraska and the highest in the nation for 2015. We discussed the latest numbers with John here around noon on Wednesday, but started by asking for an update on crop conditions in his area of northeast Nebraska.
Jeff, they're excellent. You know, we've caught some rain, we've been able to irrigate a little bit, and the weather's perfect. So conditions really couldn't be much better.
Harvest has begun?
A little bit of soybeans getting cut. Guys kind of thinking about some high moisture after we get through with Husker Harvest Days. So
the USDA released some data this morning on prevented plant acres. They released it twice. What did the data show?
You know, the first one showed prevent plant down in about a half, and so it was half of what it was 2 months ago. And then quickly people said that looks a lot like the data from 2014. And so by 7 o'clock, people had kind of said, hey, wait a second here, this doesn't look right. Let's take another shot at that. So at 9 a.m. this morning, they released the correct data, which showed a little bit less than the last time they reported it. So overall, I think the market was expecting maybe a little bullish surprise from it or support from it. Didn't get it, so we're chopping a little lower today.
Let's talk about Friday's report. First on yield. Lower corn yield, increase in soybean yield. Do you think that's appropriate across the country?
I do. I think if you look at conditions, we've tried to force the conditions lower the last several weeks, and every week they've stayed right here, stronger than anybody anticipated. But you've had rain, Jeff. You've had rain. You've got a natural dry down process here that has kept us extremely good in ratings. And so you're going to see a yield that was a little less than the average guess, but still very good. So I think it's about right. I really do. I don't have any problems with it.
All right, let's talk about the stocks numbers. Any surprises there in Friday's report?
Nah, not really, Jeff. I think it makes sense. I don't have any problems with what the government's put out. I think you can find analysts that think the corn's not there, and it doesn't feel like it's there, but it's there.
Do the world stocks number give you any indication of bullish or bearish as we go forward?
It's a little bullish. I mean, we're using a little more than we expected. You know, just because the United States isn't exporting doesn't mean that Brazil isn't. And Brazil has been extremely busy the last 6 months and really the last couple of years gearing up for this. Yeah. So they're in the driver's seat. They're exporting and doing what we did 4 or 5 years ago. So
you hinted at this when we talked last in May that maybe this was a different year for the soybean market and the Chinese buyer was going to be able to be very selective about what he bought. Is that coming to fruition?
It is. It's really close, actually, Jeff. And thanks for setting it up.
Yeah,
too,
no
by
problem.
The way. But no, they've been really patient. They're 70% open for November. They're about 100% open for December, and they're done with October. So they've been able to play really patient and buy the spots they needed to. They bought some this week from the U.S. They've also bought some from Brazil this week. And so they've continued to be able to just come to the table, and we've squished our margins on the export side, and we've squished our margins on the interior, and China has won this round. So
how concerning is that for overall demand for soybeans?
I think the demand's still there. We're still going to export a lot of soybeans. It's just they're going to come at a different time. We've been front loaded the last 3 or 4 years with soybeans, so we know what the book is coming in the 1st of October. This year, there's a big question mark. The USDA still has us exporting a lot. We're still going to get there. We're still going to get there, but it's going to come at a different pace than everybody's comfortable with.
All right, before we talk about corn and soybean prices, tell me where basis is in your area.
You know, basis is basically normal, I'd call it, Jeff. The old crop corn's 25 to 35 under. The old crop beans, which we're there now into the new crop, is going to be around that 60 to 70 under range. So we're at what I would consider harvest levels, especially with the flat price being where it's at today. So, all
right, give me your analysis and your outlook for corn prices.
I think corn's going to spend a lot of time between 3 1/4 and 3.75, Jeff. And this week we tried to poke back up towards that $4 mark on the futures, and we gave it up. We're giving it back up yesterday a little bit, and today we're seeing some of that as well. So I don't think we've got buying to hold us up at these higher levels.
At what level would you be aggressive at selling then?
I think if we can poke above the $4, you do it. And I think if you can start to see the South American crop unfold, and they're growing, they just started putting soybeans in the ground today, that'll really be the key to go off of for the next 6 months. But $4 is a good price.
Give me the soybean outlook.
Soybeans, I think, are going to bounce a little bit here short term. We're going to see the Chinese demand. I think it's going to outweigh the farmers selling. And I think we're going to pop soybeans, 25 or 30 cents here. But I think you got to be careful, because when the farmer goes to the field, and if he's got record in a lot of areas, I think that's going to be his crop to sell. And so I would think that we'll be $1 less than this in the next month on soybeans, and then we'll find our lows from there and play the weather game.
Do you like anything in 2016 for either corn or soybeans?
Corn, hands down, is better money, Jeff. I don't really care where you're at. You can go to the incremental areas, but corn is going to be the better money. And so something needs to give here, because as I talked about, there's beans still leaving the country. We can't go to 0 acres of beans next year. We're going to need to do a little fighting. So look for corn to probably drop a little bit, and beans, even though I said they're $1 cheaper, they got some work to do.
Next week, we'll look at corn, soybean, and wheat markets with North Dakota State Extension economist Frayne Olson. The country's growers have until the end of the month to sign contracts for ARC and PLC farm programs. While producers elected into either ag risk coverage or price loss coverage months ago, they still need to enroll for the 2014 and 2015 crop years in order to receive potential payments. We asked Cathy Anderson from Nebraska's State Farm Service Agency to outline this critical step to these new programs.
It's been a very busy summer in our FSA offices. Producers have been in several times doing all their Farm Bill implementation activities, base reallocation, yield update, program election. They've been back in to certify their acres, and we've appreciated all the cooperation we've had with everyone in getting all that done. But the other big thing we want to keep in the forefront of everybody's mind is we still want to make sure we're getting enrollment done for both 2014 and 2015 for our ARC PLC programs. We currently have a deadline of September 30th. And so what we find is we have some producers, they've been in the office several times, they're thinking I've got all of that done, but in reality maybe they haven't initiated those contracts. Or we have folks that have come in and initiated the contracts, but they needed to take them out and get some additional signatures from landowners or other producers on the farm. So we really need everybody to take time before they get really busy with harvest in the field, make sure that those contracts are back in. If they gave their landowners or other producers those contracts to get signatures, make sure they've got them submitted back in. It's just so critical, because we've done all the work up to this point for this program, but if those contracts aren't enrolled, then they're not going to be eligible for any benefits that can be earned.
Cathy says the FSA expects 2014 payments to be issued sometime in October. She also says benefits from ARC at the county level could differ significantly from one county to the next. Our August 14th episode of Market Journal contains an interview with Nebraska Extension Public Policy Specialist Brad Lubin detailing potential payments producers could receive from ARC and PLC this fall. The Nebraska Department of Ag, in partnership with Nebraska Extension and Legal Aid of Nebraska, held daily sessions here at Husker Harvest Days this year aimed at farm succession and transition planning. One of the presenters there was Nebraska Extension's Dave Goeller. We talked with Dave after one of the discussions and started by asking when a farmer or rancher should start to think about farm succession.
Well, I don't think you can start too early. You know, you surely want to be thinking about it if you have a successor that you're already pretty confident is interested in coming back into the business, which could be, you know, 40s, even 50s. If you haven't chosen someone by the time you get into that 60, 70 time frame, you may be looking at someone that maybe even is not part of your family. You may be looking, as I did, the successors for our farm business are actually neighbor boys that have taken over, and they're farming and renting our business, using some of our machinery, some of that. So it depends on kind of your own situation. I wouldn't say any two situations are identical, but it would give you a guideline there.
So what's the advice to the person who's starting to think about it? How do you go about doing it?
You have some decisions to make. One of them has to do with, has that individual that is coming back or considering to come back, have they been compensated for the contributions that they've already made? And if they have been, then I don't think you need to make special considerations in your estate plan for them. That's one consideration. The other consideration is you have to double check this financial viability now. We have numbers that have changed significantly in the last couple of years, and do those numbers still work? I don't think you can or should guarantee success for that successor, but I think they should at least have a fighting chance to make this thing work, and so the financial viability is another key part of it.
You said something yesterday that was concerning to a son who had a parent in the audience, and that was you don't have to treat all heirs equally or all sons and daughters equally. Why is that?
Well, you know, I'm a believer in what I call the golden rule, that meaning the people with the gold make the rule. And what's important to the people with the gold, in other words, the owner of those assets, the owner of that farm business, is do you favor succession? Do you want this farm or this ranch business to continue down the road regardless? If that's the case, you may not be able to treat each child equally from a dollars and cents standpoint. So you may not be able to treat them equally if you really want to make succession happen. On the other hand, if you have a large business, a lot of assets, maybe some non-farm assets, and you can treat them all equally, great. I'm certainly not opposed to that, but you may have to make a choice, and there's times when you do.
Am I also correct in saying that one of the things you think when you say retire isn't that you have to step away from the farm, but rather you're not the one who's making all the decisions anymore?
Yeah, the management is, I think, the transition of the management, the passing the baton of the day-to-day decision-making authority. That's really key. If the individual that owns it continues to make all the management decisions, you know, until they're 95 years old, the chance of that next individual succeeding has really been diminished because of the fact they've never had the chance to do it. And so when I say retire, I'm talking about retiring from the management making authority and passing that day-to-day stuff on, not necessarily the day-to-day labor. If you want to get out there and work day-to-day from sun up to sundown, that's great. As far as I'm concerned, I think most people would agree with that. But deciding the management, if you're making all the management choices, that's a pretty difficult thing for the next successor to make happen.
You'll have some workshops coming up in early 2016 that will better help people understand and plan for this. Tell me about those.
Right. We're doing workshops. We have a USDA grant in conjunction with the Department of Ag, the university, the Center for Rural Affairs, and the Nebraska Legal Services and the hotline. We'll be doing workshops around the state. We're hoping to do 12 to 15 of those. If people are interested and would like to attend, simply call the Nebraska Farm Hotline. That's 800-464-0258. And tell them that you're interested in those workshops. When we have the schedule or when there's one near them, they'll be called and identified as one of those workshops they can attend. So.
We'll put more resources from the farm succession presentations on the Market Journal website if you're interested in finding more information. The September Nebraska farmer says this year was a trying one for hard red winter wheat growers. The challenges started with a sudden drop-off in temperatures in November, followed by a lack of snow cover during winter, warm temperatures in January, and a dry March. Then came this year's disease challenges, including stripe rust and fusarium head blight. For a wrap-up of this year's issues and a few pointers to take away for the coming winter wheat crop, you can check out the September Nebraska Farmer. From June through August, much of the Corn Belt experienced wetter than normal conditions. While Nebraska was merely above average, the USDA said this week Iowa, South Dakota, Illinois, Indiana, and Missouri were among the states to receive much above average precipitation. Meanwhile, Iowa, Illinois, and Indiana were the only states in the nation to record below normal temperatures during that time frame. At Husker Harvest Days Tuesday, we talked with Nebraska Extension Cropping Systems educator Tyler Williams to get an outlook on harvest weather for Nebraska and an update on temperature and soil moisture conditions as we approach fall.
Well, across the state, we've seen a lot of different, different variables out there. As far as eastern Nebraska is quite wet, certain portions around Omaha and a little west. You get out in the central part of Nebraska, like here at Grand Island, it's one of the drier parts of the state. Soil moisture's been quite depleted over the last 30 days. And then again, back out in the southwest part of Nebraska has really dried out, especially through the heat the last couple weeks. So we're seeing some up and down across the state, but overall we're declining across the state from where we were 30 days ago.
Have temperatures been about normal, or have they been above or below?
Well, from the growing season perspective, since last May or June, we've actually been below normal up until the last few weeks. June, July, even most of August tracked below normal for most of Nebraska. And the last 2 to 3 weeks have actually been quite a bit above normal. 5 to 10 degrees for certain weeks have been above normal. So through the growing season, we had great growing conditions with those cooler temperatures. Recently, we've had these warm temperatures that we're experiencing this week, and so that's helped to speed up maturity. So it's actually worked out quite well in our favor, especially for corn.
Give me an outlook of harvest conditions, what we could see across the state for both precip and temperatures.
Well, I think from the standpoint of the next couple weeks, we'll see it stay fairly dry and warm. Should speed up the maturity of the crops, speed up when harvest is going to commence and even finish maybe for some people. The next few weeks look to remain that way. And as we get into October and a little bit further, it's a little bit up in the air as to whether some of that moisture from the desert southwest comes up, from the monsoon, comes up into our area. But for right now, things look pretty good as far as getting harvest going. Maturity looks to be on track and speeding up now. So I think we'll have a fairly good harvest.
Give me a refresher of the El Nino conditions that we're currently in.
Yeah, El Nino's been on the news a lot lately, and it's kind of setting up to be one of the record El Ninos. Although we have a short database on the number of El Ninos out there, it's quite impressive for this time of year. So that'll have maybe a slight impact for Nebraska. It's really centered on the northern part of the U.S. They expect a little bit drier air, warmer than normal through the winter. So that could impact Nebraska, but we could easily see some of that moisture from the south move up into Nebraska and maybe increase some of our snowfall, some of our precipitation as we head into the winter.
Now, what indication is there that this El Nino will extend into 2016, and how far into 2016 if it does?
Well, right now the projections are for it to at least extend into and through the winter of 2016. There's a pretty high likelihood that it'll extend into the spring of 2016. I think the CPC has a 95% chance that it'll extend through February of 2016. It takes a little bit to get out of an El Nino, so I think it'll extend into at least part of the spring of next year, and we'll see where it goes from there.
Is there any indication that La Nina, or is there any correlation to La Nina following an El Nino year?
Well, it's pretty hard for it to flip-flop to a La Nina, to get ocean temperatures to change that fast. Water doesn't warm or cool very fast, so to flip right away to a La Nina, the chances are quite low. Maybe get back into neutral conditions, and then it could follow into a La Nina then, but to get back-to-back would be quite unusual.
We'll get a short-term weather outlook in a few minutes when Al Dutcher gives his weekly weather forecast. The latest USDA estimates project Nebraska farmers will grow more than 1.6 billion bushels of corn on an average yield of 184 bushels per acre. That yield forecast is 3 bushels per acre lower than last month's expectation, but 5 bushels per acre above 2014. In our previous episode of Market Journal, we looked at how growers could estimate their own soybean yields, and this week, Nebraska Extension Cropping Systems educator Nathan Meuret demonstrates how to do the same in corn.
It's that time of year where we want to get those pre-season, pre-harvest yield estimates in, and it really helps with thinking about, do you have enough storage on farm for your corn, or are you going to need to look at storing elsewhere? And it gives you an idea of what yield you might expect for marketing purposes. So yeah, first thing you do, get in, walk past the end rows, walk another at least 60 foot into the field, so you're getting to a place where your corn planter is operating under normal conditions.
And then you measure out what, so you have a representative sample?
Yep, for a representative sample in corn, we're going to work with, just for multiplication ease and ease of everything, 1/1000th of an acre. So in 30-inch row corn, that's 17 foot 5 inches, and that's typically what we see for row spacing here in Dodge County. And so in that 17 foot 5 inches, we'll tape that off with the tape measure, lay it down, and then every 5th ear in dry land, I'll go and pull the husk back on every 5th ear. And so that makes it random, right? So you're not cherry picking one ear over the other. The ears themselves are going to tell you what the averages are.
That's in dry land, you said. What about in irrigated?
Yep, that's in dry land. Irrigated, just so you're using that whole 17 foot 5 inches and getting an average, I'm going to do every 6th ear in irrigated. And then when you're doing one row, we know that the row unit may not be running as efficiency as well in each row. So I'm going to do 2 yield estimates side by side to get an average, hopefully across 2 row units, and to get a better idea of what that spot average is.
In those 2 rows, then you're peeling back every 5th ear or every 6th ear in irrigated and doing what to the ear?
Yep, so every 5th ear, so a total of 10 ears in those 2 rows. I'm going to count how many rows there are around, so 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, whatever it is, write that down, and then I'm going to count how many kernels are in each row. You don't count the kernels on the very bottom of the ear, and you don't count all the kernels at the very end. What you're looking for is the amount of kernels there are that have a continuous series of rows or kernels. So it's going to be a little less kernels than the kernels that are actually on that ear.
How do you use that information then?
Yep, so what we really want to know is what's the average kernels there are on an ear out of all those ears out there. So to get the average number of kernels on an ear, you're going to take the number of rows around by how many kernels there are in each row to get an ear, total kernels on this ear. And that could be anywhere from 300 to 600. And that's what we want to do, is get the average number of kernels on those 5 ears that we're looking at in a yield estimate. You average those 5 ears in one side and the average on the other 5, and you're going to take kernels per ear, the average, times the number of ears that you have in that 17 feet 5 inches. You multiply that number, and then you're going to divide by a kernel fudge factor, or kernel weight factor. With this year, with the good conditions, I'm going to use 75,000 or a number of 75 to divide that by. Under normal years, maybe 85 for dry land, 75 for irrigated for a conversion factor. But in a drought year like 2012, you're going to use 95. So I guess that's part of this estimate that we don't know yet, is what the kernel weights are going to be.
Simple enough to break an ear in half and say this looks bigger than...
Yeah, and I did that during the crop tour here in Dodge County. Snapped the ears in half, and there was on some sandy ground. It was very clear that the kernels weren't very deep, weren't very big, so you can get an idea, a rough idea of what you're looking at.
What was the total yield that you found today?
Yeah, the total yield in the field here was 189 bushels. In one row we had 25 ears, and the other one we had 26. So we had a little bit bigger ears in one row, so the difference was over 200 and under quite a bit less, so an average of 189. And that's the advantage to taking an average of 2 rows.
And ideally, do you want to do this in more than one spot in the field?
Yep, just like we do with soybeans, you're going to want to get an average of several spots in the field and try to get representative spots. Is a little harder to tell what that is in corn, because in a soybean field you can look over the field and know what that is. In a corn field, you're walking into what you're walking in. So it's important, if you have yield history in fields, try to get in representative spots and walk out there and pick those spots.
A little quicker than doing it in soybeans though?
Yeah, the nice thing about when corn, you have your numbers when you walk out of the field. You're not having to bring the bean plants out in the field with you. It is a little bit quicker to get a yield estimate corn, and we don't have any adjustment factors. For harvest loss, moisture loss, I found you don't need those to get the yield estimate we get as it is, gets us pretty close to what we see at harvest. With soybeans, that's not necessarily the case.
Now with this week's weather forecast, here's Nebraska Extension State Climatologist Al Dutcher.
Well, folks, here again for the weekly forecast. Of course, this last week was Husker Harvest Days, and we did see some very warm, windy weather develop during the week. 100-degree temperatures were reported in isolated spots in north central and southwest Nebraska, but consistently we were well into the 90s statewide until we got into the Thursday time frame when we started to see the cold front slip through the state. And we actually generated some decent rainfall totals across portions of northern and central Nebraska as that front moved through the state. And it has now cleared the state, and we are expecting very cool conditions this week. And then we'll pay attention to a trough moving to the Pacific Northwest that looks like a setup to put pieces of energy into our region on a continual basis as we get into the midweek period and beyond, increasing our chances for once again some additional moisture. Now you'll notice that there isn't a lot of changes on the drought monitor this week, and that is because we were at Husker Harvest Days and the drought monitor authors really didn't do much, but they have been given notice about how dry conditions have been, and they are in agreement, so we would expect to see some radical changes in the drought monitor depiction for Nebraska as we get into next week. But let's get to look at the upper air models, and as we look at the upper air models, one thing we'll notice is here's that trough that brought the cooler weather into our region. It's slipping to our east, so in its wake we're expecting pretty much sunny skies today. Very very cool conditions, typically well below normal. We're looking at temperatures that are going to be in the upper 60s to the mid to upper 70s. And as we go into tomorrow, we'll notice that not much in the way of activity is that upper air low system is kind of weakened somewhat. We're still in a northwest flow. Some systems may be moving through the northern plains that might just touch off some isolated shower activity in portions of maybe central and northeast Nebraska, but if it does occur, it'll probably be more than the normal of sprinkles. And then as we get into Monday, we start seeing a ridge trying to build in from the southwest, bringing warmer air into the western part of the state. It may be delayed a little bit in the eastern part of the state as we still remain cooler than normal with that northerly flow in eastern Nebraska in the upper atmosphere. As we get into Tuesday, now the ridge starts building in, but we also see some troughing action, so we'll start to see some moisture generating from the southwest and pushing toward the central plains, and we'll need to see some action from this trough digging a little bit farther south before we see the precipitation make it to the surface. So by the time we get to Wednesday, we'll start to see that trough digging rapidly toward the southwest. Here comes that monsoon moisture, so it looks like we may see some scattered shower and thunderstorm activity across the western half of the state, particularly in the later part of the afternoon, and that will translate itself to eastern Nebraska as we get into Thursday, with much cooler conditions starting to invade the northwestern United States and the northern plains. And by Friday, we start to see some relaxation, but we're still going to be in this flow with the moisture pushing out of the southwest, so Nebraska looks to be in the forefront. So if we look at the temperature forecast, we are looking for cool conditions this weekend, warming up during the middle part of the week, only to see a cool down as we progress through the week. And as we look at the 8 to 14 day forecast, with more warmth building after that cold comes in, we are expecting above normal temperatures. The good news is we're starting to see much of the moisture moving from the Pacific Northwest into the northern plains and actually setting up for a very wet last week of the month for here in Nebraska.
Thanks, Al. Today's interviews can be found individually on the Market Journal website and through the Market Journal mobile app. They include information on corn and soybean markets, signing contracts for ARC and PLC programs, farm succession, a harvest weather outlook, and estimating corn yields. As always, you can keep up with Market Journal during the week by following us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Next week, Frayne Olson will analyze grain markets. Until then, from Husker Harvest Days near Grand Island, I'm Jeff Wilkerson. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board and the Nebraska Soybean Board. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board and the Nebraska Soybean Board.
Soybeans are found on dinner tables around the world. Some form of the soybean is found in baby foods, snacks, cooking oils, and many other food items eaten daily. And soybeans provide the protein in the diets for livestock and fish. The Nebraska soybean farmers support research to develop new soy-based products for foods, livestock, and industrial uses through their checkoff dollars. The Nebraska Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.